In today's video, we are looking at a comprehensive overview of the types of spaces and buildings of the esports scene. For this video, I just want to give you a quick, clear, solid idea of what each one of these spatial/building typologies look like and what do they facilitate and what is their purpose of the design. They're not stationary, right? It's not easy to just put them one after the other in a sequential manner. So I'm treating this exercise of relating all of these esports spaces to each other more as a spectrum that is that have dynamic ranges for each one, but they do have a limit to how much they can span. By the end of the video, the viewer should have a pretty good idea, at least a comprehensive overview of all the different types of esports spaces that are out there. If you like the video, make sure to click that like button because it really helps with the algorithm, and subscribe to the channel to not miss any of the upcoming videos. So let's start with game centers, our first one. These, you can think of them as the parallel or a modern game arcade. They tend to be small scale, they tend to be local, they tend to be focused on a social aspect. So, fraternity, just friends coming together, playing. There is a little bit of competition, but it's not professional competitions, right? It's more about social group competition, and they tend to be casual. They range from very humble, where their setup is just a few computers, maybe 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 computers, very, very humble setup, to very, very high-end tech and environment design. So the range of how they look and how they are equipped varies a lot. Now, the particular example that we're going to be talking about is Helix Sports, and they have 2 locations in New Jersey and Massachusetts. They have a lot of computers, and they capitalize on the aesthetics of the computers. In this particular design, all of the components of the computers, the technology is just out there. It's not hidden. The look has kind of a warehouse, modern warehouse look design. Computers grouped together, so there's a lot of tables, right? That permits a group of friends sitting together and playing. It also permits group activities. So you have one group of players to the left, one group of players to the right, and they're kind of like battling each other. There is a stage. Not every single game center has a stage. This is kind of as mentioned, a high-end version of a game center. But this permits if it's a tournament is being locally run, they can run a small tournament-like setup. Players are being able to put on the spotlight in the big screen, right? It's a social dynamics, but it's also helping players get the kind of like esports experience at a very small social scale. We also have spaces for just not to necessarily play. We also have places to hang out and sit and talk and eat and whatnot. In terms of space location, or where you can find these types of game centers, they tend to be part of a bigger building, right? So they're usually part of a mall, or they are part of a greater facility, like a training facilities. For Helix, they are the primary tenant of this building, if not the building itself. Again, Helix is on the higher end of the design of these spaces. These spaces tend to be more humble and local and integrated into an existing building. Then we have college facilities. This is a kind of a step up to the game centers. They share a lot of the characteristics, the equipment, the layout. The main difference between them is mostly their purpose. The purpose of a college facility, an esports facility, is to train students to participate in some role of the esports world. It doesn't only have to be an esports player. It could be a broadcaster, it could be a lighting designer, it could be a sound technician, it could be any of these components. So that means that the facility is not necessarily hyper geared for the experience of playing a game locally and casually. Instead, yes, they have the playing components because they are training esports players, but it's more about the holistic approach and ecosystem of esports. College facilities tend to be small scale while the demand grows. Like these programs in colleges are starting, they're getting friction as they're moving forward. So they usually start very, very small, just so the college or the university is trying out this program. And as time goes on, these programs are going to keep growing. So for now, they're on the small scale end of my spectrum, but again, they might shift. As mentioned, their focus is career development, not necessarily entertainment, and they're hyper local focus more than the game center, arguably, because the game center is trying to accommodate all of the surrounding community. The game facility is only the college, smaller pool of people. We're going to be looking at two examples. The first one is Edinboro University in Ohio, and the other one is Harrisburg College in Philadelphia. You have your desks with the computers all grouped in a room. You also have space to sit down. It's not all about only playing. What I want you to note here is that they have a room that, in this case, the whole facility is relatively small. It's just one big room. Of that big room, almost a quarter of that room is set up for the broadcasting part. So for the back end of the playing. This is how it's usually set up in college facilities. In Harrisburg, you'll see that the design of this one is a little bit more high end. There's a lot more design on the walls. They have way more colors. The space is bigger. It's more articulated than the other one, but still it has playing spaces and it has broadcasting backend spaces. And this is just how it tends to look for the college facilities. Then we're moving to local area networks or LAN parties. I need to subdivide them into temporary iteration and their stationary iteration. So let's start with a temporary because it's kind of like the cooler one. Local area network is nothing more than a whole bunch of people bringing their computers and playing together in a physical space connected to each other, right? So they're playing whoever is in that group or in that space through their computers or through their consoles. These tend to be very big scale because they tend to be attached to running events like DreamHack, for example. So you have temporary LAN parties that are just capitalizing on a big event, pulling a lot of people into it. They hold a mix of local and global audiences. It's steered towards the casual player, but with a very, very dedicated base of casual players. And also, they tend to hold a lot of streamers and influencers in the space. So for this one, for the example of the big temporary LAN parties, we'll look at DreamHack. As you can see, these tend to be big spaces, usually in a convention center or warehouses. They tend to be just big square footage with empty tables that people bring in their own computers, their own setup. They just sit there, maybe 2-3 days, they're just stationed there. Their equipment stays there, they play there. The other part of the LAN party is the stationary version of it, which tends to be way, way smaller. It tends to be still in a big room, not a big building, not a big space, a big room, almost like a conference room where you have a big table, maybe 1 or 2 big tables that you can hold 10, 20, 30 computers. People can bring their own computers. At this point, usually the computers are provided because it's more of a service, maybe kind of like similar to the game centers, maybe the game center has, or it can be thought of as a LAN party of a sort. It's an independent event. It does not depend on a running event. Usually it's its own event to run and participate in. They do need to be located near a critical mass of people, like maybe in a college, maybe in a mall or something. You still need to be able to have that space run and be functional. You still need to have a lot of people around that will come and easily use the space, because the other ones, they have a running event that kind of like incentivizes you to go and play. For the examples of this one, as mentioned, Helix Sports Game Center could be considered a LAN party, but Usually these spaces are also very flexible. The key components of them is that they just need a good big table, good internet connection, comfortable chairs, and usually this type of space is being used for hours and hours on top of hours. People are coming together, just playing, bringing their equipment, or just paying to use the equipment. Next on the list is college arenas. These tend to be small to medium scale. Now, what do I mean by that? The scale tends to be, or the capacity of these college arenas tend to be from 300 to 500, 600 people. Again, it's a spectrum, it's an average. They can be smaller, they can be bigger. But the arenas right now in the college scene, they're starting small. This whole esports thing is a big experiment right now. A lot of colleges are just trying this out. So naturally, they're going to try, or they're going to start with small programs. And as time keeps going, they're probably going to grow. These spaces tend to be very, very well equipped with technology because just as with the esports facilities in the colleges, they want to be able to train the future technicians, the future designers, the future players in these spaces. So it's almost like a mock-up space of the real thing. These spaces, these arenas tend to be flexible in nature because they want to be able to try out different things. They want to be able to hold different types of esports events, and sometimes not just esports events. They want to try out or use it for plays and musical festivals and whatnot. So there is a component of flexibility that tends to be part of college arenas. The focus of the space tends to be on students, as mentioned, the players, the broadcasters, the technicians, the designers. It's also a tool to develop the social aspect of the whole college by using esports as that performance space or that event that brings in people, just like any other sports game or art exhibition or whatnot that the college might be running. The example for this one that we're going to be using is Full Sail in Florida. It's relatively small. It holds around 500 people, 600 people, if I'm not mistaken. It varies because it has a lot of flexibility, so they can add and take away shares. They can move the stage. But as you can see, the focus, especially the screen and just the design, is geared towards this more esports setup. It's used to hold tournaments, to hold events. It's also used to hold LAN parties. The next one in my list is commercial arenas. Now, this is very similar to the college arenas, but the scale tends to be bigger because it's professional events that are happening. Actual commercial operations are happening here. The scale tends to be mid to large, so this tends to fluctuate anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 people, anywhere in that range. It tends to be a single purpose building, so it is designed for events, and it's usually one stage for one event or tournament. So it's not a building that has various events. It doesn't have various programs running. It's usually geared towards facilitating one event at a time. The event can be big, the event can have a lot of parts and pieces to it, but it's still one event. Here, the commercial arenas is where opportunities to have these flashy buildings, right? These statements to the culture and the city are starting to emerge here because they tend to be buildings on their own. They tend to be smaller, but they still tend to be on their own block or part of a block, but their own building. While college arenas, they could be their own thing, but they're usually part of an existing building, and just a space has been carved out and turned into these college arenas. So the example that we are going to be looking at for the commercial arenas is the first project that we're going to be seeing that is not real. It was conceptualized, it was planned to be real, but the pandemic happened and it shifted all the economics of the project around. It never got built, and it has been redesigned and reconceptualized to be something else, more of an events venue rather than an esports focused venue. But I still think it's worth to look at because it is a very, very good precedent of what can be done in this space. This is a standalone building. It has a unique shape. It's a unique building. It pops. It's very attractive. It's very modern looking. You come in, you have this giant screen, right? So it's kind of this celebration of technology. You come in and it's completely focused. I think this one in particular holds 3,500 people, and all of them, all the seats are oriented to look at one stage. Project itself, the building has other components, but the components are program that is supplementing and supporting the running of that one stage. And this one in particular, this arena, was designed to be part of a bigger entertainment slash sports district in Philadelphia. So it was going to be next to the basketball arena and the baseball field and other things. So these arena type components tend to be a part of a bigger urban development, right? They don't tend to be solo buildings on their own trying to bring people. They try to become part of a city's entertainment and sports district. Next on the list is stadiums. Now, stadiums in my head, they tend to be a bigger version of commercial arenas. They tend to hold more than 5,000 people at a time. They're still a single purpose building, so even though their scale is bigger, they're still just looking at one stage, at one event. Probably the event and the supporting program around it is more articulated, better suited for these bigger events than an arena would have. Right now, we don't have any real examples of a dedicated stadium for esports. We have a lot of stadiums, sports stadiums, that have been modified to hold temporary events of esports, but that's not really what I'm talking about here in this particular video. Right now, we do not have a stadium that is designed for esports. The example that we're going to be looking at, it's more of the idea of how a stadium could look like. And as you can see, the scale is big. The way that the audience is segmented is different from your normal sports stadium. The use of technology is more evident and heavily. The lighting to be able to shade different portions of the audience and maybe, kind of tell you're from this team and that's from that team. You also have a lot of screens, right? Not just being used to depict the game or communicate what's happening in the event, but also as an architectural feature. You can see that the arena itself tends to be smaller. It is recognized that the stage for the esports players doesn't need to be as big. So even though we're talking about a big scale building in terms of how many people they're in it, if you compare this to a basketball stadium, a soccer stadium, all of the different sports stadiums, the field, the core of what people go there to watch, if you compare that to an esports arena and a sports arena, the difference is drastic because esports need very, very small spaces to actually play. Because a lot of the game, I mean the whole game in reality, but a lot of what the people are there to spectate is happening through screens, not in the physical field. Then we move to the multi-program buildings. This is a step up from arenas, I would say, rather than stadiums, because the scale of a multi-program building in terms of esports is, I think, comparable to a stadium, but the multi-program, as hopefully the name implies, has multiple programs in it. So it's not focused on esports anymore. The greater programmatic elements of the building are still supporting the esports viewing experience or playing experience, but they're big enough that they can function independently. What do I mean by this? So, for example, an arena or esports event hall that also has a hotel attached to it and connected to it. And it's just one project, but the hotel components is not there to just bring in people. It's not a resort. It's a hotel to house people so they can go to the event, so they can experience the esports. So it tends to be big scale, tends to have one building holding various programs to support, expand, or enhance the esports viewing experience. The example that we're going to be looking at for this one is the Toronto Performance Venue and Hotel. Now, this project has three main components. It has the arena, has the hotel, and then has a somewhat of an event exhibition space, almost like a small convention center. And as you can see with this one, its design is very fluid, is very modern. It's kind of like giving that statement of there is something unique and new happening here in this building, right? And even if you can see the hotel part, the language of the hotel, which is a known program, a program from the old world, if you would, compared to the arena shape, is completely different languages, because it's like the new and the old. The important is the arena, not necessarily the hotel. The hotel is there, but it's to support what is happening in the arena. Now, this project was redesigned. I don't know the details of why it was redesigned. I don't know, maybe had to do with the aesthetics and people not liking it, because the redesign is the same version, the same program in a subtler way. It kind of looks toned down. It's still very beautiful. It still has a very interesting shape. This one looks kind of like more elegant, kind of has like these toned down green and brown colors. I don't know. It's more serene. I think it's the word. The key point here is that the esports focus was taken away, where the previous iteration was completely focused to primarily attend and host an esports event. This other one is they can host esports events, but it's not the primary thing that they're going to do anymore. That's unfortunate. Building still looks really cool though. The next on our list is an urban block. This is usually a development that stretches across a greater horizontal area. So we're not talking about a single building. So far, we've been talking about single buildings, small and big, or spaces. This here is where the scale really starts to grow, and you start to have a sprawl of the program where it is so complex, it is so big that it doesn't make sense, or a single building can hold it. These types of developments, they look to activate their spaces not just for a specific weekend during an event. Because of their scale, usually because of their location, they are trying to incorporate way more programs, not just only esports. Still, esports is the focus, but they tend to start incorporating other programs so people come in there during the week. Maybe they have stores, maybe they have restaurants, they have all these other amenities that are supporting the esports program. The example that we're going to be looking at for this one is another conceptual master plan project. It is a block big, has various arenas, has various other programs. Point here is how to weave in not just each program or each building with the other buildings, but also the spaces between the buildings. How can you now think about the experience a little bit more deeper and richer from the outside of the buildings, in between the buildings, and not just in the buildings? In this case, they're using the facade of one of the arenas to project images in there. They're trying to include game elements like statues and graphics around the exterior spaces. And the last one in my list, or in my diagram, is the city. Now, this one does sound a bit hyperbolic. It does sound very hyperbolic, but not out of the question. It's basically all of the same components and ideas of the urban block, but taken to an extreme of scale. And yeah, just think about a city, but every single block is just somehow focused, or its purpose is to enhance and support the esports program. The one that we're going to be talking about is a conceptual project that is to be built, supposedly, hopefully, Qiddiya City in Saudi Arabia. What we're going to be looking here is first at the arena, the building itself, and then we're going to be talking about the greater city. Now, if you notice, this arena, this stadium, this esports facility does not look like your normal stadium typology. The form of it, it's not the same. What I like about this project is that it's starting to break away from the ancestor that we are using as that model to try to create the spectating experience of esports. Now, inside, there's still a venue, it's still people seated looking at a stage, but you also notice the amount of screens that are planned to be used here. And that is because There's a lot of information in the game, so it makes sense to have all of those screens. You also notice the technology, right? The aesthetics of it. It's not just the amount of screens, but it's all of the LED lights, all of the use of colors inside and out. Now, if we start looking at the greater plan of this Quidilla city, and it's really not just an esports focused city, it's really an entertainment city. So it's everything from virtual to physical entertainment. So you have roller coaster parks, and you have motocross and F1 racing and basketball and skiing. It's a Saudi Arabia project, right? But then you have the virtual district, and in this case, it's an actual district with various blocks, and that is focused on virtual, like, gaming. And as you can see, the aesthetics look completely different from anything that we have seen before. And again, this is a very ambitious project. We'll see if it happens. I'm excited that someone's thinking about it, but yeah, I hope it happens. Now, to wrap all of this up, because we have been seeing each space at a time, I've been kind of relating them as I go through each one. But I wanted to kind of put a layer of analysis, at least one, over this sequence of margins of where these spaces live. The way that I'm going to be analyzing this or categorizing these is in light of what are spaces, what are buildings, and what are districts. And this is a very architectural analysis, but that's kind of like what we're doing in this video series. We are looking at the esports arena from the architecture, from the spatial perspective. These are not solid rule. It's just a spectrum of scales and characteristics, but they do help to categorize better all of these different points in the spectrum, from the single space with 2 or 3 computers to the complete city being designed. So what are the characteristics of spaces? They tend to be local and community focused. They tend to have a very small scale, 10 to maybe 1,000 people, I would say is the edge of it. Tend to be single use purpose. They're focused on player participation rather than spectating. The focus is social, it's community, rather than professional or competitive. And you can find these as part of other structures, right? So they're part of malls and facilities, or in standalone small buildings. So the category of buildings, they tend to be local, but with a maybe 50-50 or slightly greater view to the greater radius. That could be a greater geographical radius. That could be a greater demographic radius, but they tend to not be locally focused. And this just usually a function of their size and needing to cater to a greater demographic to bring in enough people to maintain the operation. They tend to be medium scale, so they can house anywhere from 500 people to maybe 4,000 people. They are still single use purpose. They are focused on spectating rather than participating, even though they do have social components inevitably. And you can find these in urban areas. They tend to be their own building, but integrated into a greater fabric or block or a district where they can add and capitalize in the activity that is already happening there. The last category are districts. So these are the very, very big scale projects, right? So think 4,000-5,000 people plus. They are starting to cater more towards the global audience, but they still need to cater to the local audience, because for the events, the operations are going to be carried more by the global audience, but the day-to-day operations of these bigger urban scale projects need to be carried by the local audience. So it's a interesting challenge to balance out the likes and wants of these two different demographics. These projects in the district category tend to be multi-use purpose with gaming arenas at its core. They're not focused on single events, but rather on activation also during non-events. Their focus is on spectating with rich options for players to participate and celebrate the community and the games, right? So think about DreamHack and the social celebration of the gaming. These spaces that fall under district district tend to have more of those type of spaces. And you can find these in urban locations, and they're usually the epicenter of the development that is happening. So let's now talk about what we did not talk about, which was a lot. We did not talk about every single type of possible space and building that is out there. What I'm trying to do here with this video and this diagram is almost like within the big categories of spaces, building, and districts, I'm trying to bring a finer tune understanding of all the species that live within those families, if you would. I do recognize there's way more examples, different iterations, and that's why I'm calling this a spectrum. We can mix and match this in a lot of ways. There's a ton of other ways to analyze all of these spaces. So we have the tension between local versus global. We have casual versus professional. We have participation versus spectation. We have virtual versus physical, which is a very, very interesting one that I'm hoping to get to, in the 5th or 6th video of the series. And that also brings the tension of private versus public spaces in this area. We also did not talk about any existing remodeled or retrofitted or modified spaces like your normal stadiums, your arenas that have been, from a mall or a convention centers that have been remodeled into something else, an esports event. I have not talked about those, and in the next video, you will see why. But in this video, I just wanted to focus on the taxonomy, if you would, of the type of spaces and being focused on the projects that are being designed specifically for esports. Because I think that's the one that's going to yield the best experience rather than a remodel of another space that was designed for another thing. And that brings me to the third video. What are we going to be talking about on the third video? First video was about just a general overview of what is this esports thing, what are its main components, why do people like it, why it's important culturally, economically, and whatnot. This second video was more of a walkthrough of all the different types of spaces, buildings, and districts, conceptual, real, and to bring an understanding of all the different spaces out there. The third video is going to be about what is wrong with how we are approaching the esports spatial design, because there is a market out there, as the first video states. We have a lot of different ideas. We're trying a lot of things at different scales in different manners, but somehow the market has not been able to completely tap into the esports physical realm, bringing people in and being able to just meet the euphoria and the enthusiasm of this esports market. And I go deeper there into the different components of the problems, from a design perspective, the framework, and all of that. If you haven't seen the first video, I do encourage you to go and see it. The link is going to appear here somewhere again, and it's in the description below. If you like the video, make sure to like it because it really helps with the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel so I can keep growing and I can keep doing more cool stuff. Comment below if you liked something, if you think I missed something, if you want me to look at something in one of the future videos, or if you have any thoughts, questions, or ideas about this whole how should we bring esports into the physical realm. There's a list of more videos that I think you would like in the description below. But with that said, thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.